In this issue, we will tell you about the most important battles of the Trojan War, which determined the course of events and eventually led to the fall of the city. But before we get to the tragic finale, let's return to the battlefield, where the fate of civilizations was decided. The Trojan War. A great battle, a decade long, became the arena where the forces of gods and men crossed paths. But before the great heroes entered the battle, an event happened that became the starting point of this story: the departure of the Greek army to Troy. Let's go back to the beginning and remember how it all began, and how the intervention of the gods determined the future course of the war. After Menelaus appealed to his brother Agamemnon for help, the mobilization of the entire Greek army began. Kings from all over Hellas sent their ships to the assembly point at Avlida. Here off the coast was a huge army ready to sail to Troy and begin a long siege. But as was often the case in Greek myths, nothing happened without the intervention of the gods. Before sailing, a sign occurred that many considered a bad omen. The troops saw a serpent climb a tree and devour 8 little chicks and their mother. The soothsayer Calchas, who was with the Greeks, predicted that the war would last 9 years, but that in the 10th year Troy would fall. Soon, however, the Greek armies faced another problem. The gods did not favor their campaign. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and meadows, was offended by Agamemnon's actions in killing a deer sacred to her. She put the Greek fleet in the doldrums and in complete immobility. The ships could not sail, and the army began to panic. Artemis demanded a bloody payment from Agamemnon, the sacrifice of his daughter Iphigenia. Agamemnon hesitated for a long time, but finally, under the pressure of the soldiers and fear of the anger of the gods, agreed to this terrible decision. Iphigenia was brought to the altar to propitiate Artemis. However, at the last moment, when the sacrifice was about to be made, the goddess Artemis relented. She replaced Iphigenia with a deer and carried the girl far away from mortal eyes. After this, the wind blew and the fleet was finally able to sail to Troy. This was a clear indication that the gods were not left out of this war. Their intervention determined the fate of mortals, and every decision on Olympus could change the outcome of the battles. When the wind finally blew, the Greek fleet moved on Troy. The ships arrived at the Trojan shores, and the Greek soldiers began to land. However, the Trojans were already prepared. Paris and his brother Hector realized that war was inevitable and gathered all their forces to defend the city. The first skirmish took place already at the landing. Among the heroes who showed themselves at this stage was Achilles, whose strength and fury on the battlefield immediately drew attention to him. However, despite the courage and bravery of the Greeks, the siege of Troy proved to be much more difficult than they thought. Troy was heavily fortified, and its defenders, led by Hector, were prepared to fight to the last man. When the Greeks first landed on the shores of Troy, they expected a quick victory. A large army made up of the best warriors in Hellas should have swept the defenders of Troy off the face of the earth. However, they underestimated the resilience of the Trojans and the skill of their commanders. Immediately after the landing, the Greek troops began a siege of the city. The battles were fierce, but the first significant success of the Greeks occurred when Achilles, together with his Myrmidon warriors, captured Lyonnessus, one of the cities allied to Troy. This city was an important fortress on the approaches to Troy, and its fall weakened one of the Trojans' main lines of defense. Among all the warriors, it was Paris, whose kidnapping of Helen was the cause of the war, who was particularly hated by the Greeks. Menelaus, Helen's lawful husband, had long craved revenge. One day of battle, the two armies decided to stop the bloodshed and offer a peaceful solution to the conflict: a duel between Menelaus and Paris. It seemed that it was this duel that could decide the outcome of the entire war. Paris, despite his external beauty, was not distinguished by his bravery on the battlefield. When the duel began, Menelaus immediately gained an advantage. He was an experienced warrior, and Paris could not match his skill. But at the last moment, when it seemed that the fate of Paris was decided, the goddess Aphrodite intervened in the course of the battle. She saved her favorite by surrounding him with a cloud and carried him back to Troy. The duel ended without a winner, and the war continued. A key moment in the war occurred when conflict broke out between the two leaders of the Greek army, Achilles and Agamemnon. After a successful attack on one of the Trojan cities, Achilles captured a prisoner, Odysseus, whom he considered his reward. However, Agamemnon, insulted and annoyed by Achilles' success, took the prisoner away from him, thus angering the great hero. Achilles, insulted and humiliated, refused to participate in further battles. His dismissal became a serious problem for the Greek army, because without Achilles, their chances of victory were greatly reduced. The Greeks were on the verge of defeat, and the Trojans, led by Hector, began to push them toward the sea. Yet in the absence of Achilles, it was Hector who became the central figure on the battlefield. He showed himself not only as a brave warrior, but also as a skillful strategist. Under his command, the Trojans began to win battles, and soon the Greeks found themselves in a dangerous situation. Their ships could be destroyed. In one of the battles, Hector even managed to break through the ranks of the Greeks and set fire to several ships, which jeopardized the entire army. This was one of the most serious defeats the Greeks suffered during the entire siege of Troy. The Trojans, inspired by their successes, believed that final victory was at hand. However, one incident changed the course of the war. Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, could no longer bear to see the Greeks defeated. He decided to put on Achilles' armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle, pretending to be his greater friend. This trick worked. The Trojans, seeing Achilles on the battlefield, retreated in panic, but Hector, being an outstanding warrior, did not give in to fear. He fought Patroclus and, unaware of his true identity, killed him. Patroclus' death was the turning point. When Achilles learned of his friend's death, his rage knew no bounds. He decided to return to the battlefield to avenge Patroclus' death and destroy Hector. When Achilles returned to the battlefield, his rage was terrible. He was no longer fighting for glory or for the victory of the Greeks. He craved only revenge. Hector, realizing that his fate was sealed, courageously went out to meet Achilles, despite the warnings of his loved ones. This duel was the culmination of the war, and the whole city of Troy watched the battle anxiously. Achilles, driven by rage, was unstoppable. Hector fought with dignity, but could not withstand the might of Achilles. The Greek hero struck the fatal blow, killing Hector just before the walls of Troy. Achilles, having lost all respect for his enemy's body, then tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, demonstrating his victory and disrespect for his fallen enemy. Hector's death was the heaviest blow to the Trojans. Their chief defender had fallen, and hopes of victory began to fade. However, the story did not end there. King Priam, wishing to bury his son with honor, went to the Greek camp and, despite all the risks, personally came to Achilles with a request to give Hector's body. Achilles, who had just been consumed by rage, at this moment showed a humanity rare for heroes of the time. Seeing his father's grief, he agreed to return Hector's body, and a dignified funeral was arranged for the Trojans, filled with mourning and grief. It was the last honor given to a great warrior whose name will remain in the ages. Hector's death heralded the inevitable end of the war. The armies of Troy were without their chief defender, and the Greek armies had regained confidence with the return of Achilles. The war was not over yet, but it was already clear that Troy was weakened and its fall was only a matter of time. However, there was one more important moment ahead, a stratagem that will go down in history as one of the most ingenious military tricks. In the next installment, we will tell you how the Greeks resorted to their last but deadly plan, the Trojan horse. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this epic story. Share the video with your friends and leave comments to let us know what myths and legends are of interest to you.